I'm pretty sure they kept throwing this away, but it just kept coming back. Many of you will recognize the Boomerang flower from Mario 3D Land and Mario 3D World. And obviously it's also an in-game power-up used in the Mario Kart franchise. Specifically here in Mario Kart 8 where it's made its debut. This is one of those special items that checks off multiple boxes. It's a power-up from a recent game, it's an in-game Mario Kart 8 item, and the Boomerang in general is something that's not exactly unrecognizable to the franchise. Originally debuting in Super Mario Bros. 3, the Boomerang was the primary tool used by the Boomerang Bro. He was similar to the Hammer Bro, but he threw a boomerang. Unlike their cousin, the Hammer Bros, they were only ever in Super Mario Bros. 3 in the classic era, and they didn't come back into the mainstream until New Super Mario Bros. Released on the Nintendo DS. After that, I'm pretty sure they've been in every mainline Mario game, including the 3D ones outside of Super Mario Galaxy 1 and maybe Mario Odyssey. Not to mention frequent appearances in spin-offs and in the RPG titles. It seems like it took a while, but at some point Mario figured he had enough of Boomerang Bros BS and then stomped on his head and stole his weapon. Now while the Boomerang flower technically debuted in the 3D Land and 3D World games, so it is a relatively recent power-up and has actually yet to make a return, technically Boomerang Mario existed long before that. In 2003 we had the release of Super Mario Advanced 4, Super Mario Bros. 3. A game I recently covered in one long video along with the other classic Mario titles and their ports. What I didn't really get into in that video was the e-reader stuff for Super Mario Bros. 3. Basically physical DLC that you swipe in the e-reader and it gives you stuff in the game. Famously in Mario Bros. 3 it gives you a whole bunch of stages. These are actually all available on Nintendo Switch Online, so they're playable without collecting the cards if that's available to you. What was also nice about this is it would provide Mario a chance to use various different items from the series. So you could technically be playing a Mario Bros. 3 stage while having Cape Mario power up and picking up turnips. Long story short, if you were to swipe a Boomerang e-card, you'd get Boomerang Mario. And if I'm not mistaken, that is technically the first appearance of Boomerang Mario in the entire franchise. So as long as you consider this Game Boy Advance port to be a classic game, then this Boomerang also covers a power-up from the classic era. I know many people would have issues considering this a classic game because it came out almost 15 years after the original, but considering how far removed we are from 2003, I think at this point it's fair to say that this is a retro title. Heck, I think it's fair to say that the whole of the new Super Mario Bros. Series is a retro series, even if one of them was ported onto the Switch. In any case, I think the Boomerang flower is an excellent choice, and the only downside is that it probably should have been selected sooner. But since it seems like they were making all of this up on the fly, I can accept it. At least they have their Mario 3D Land quota reached now. Here is your quick reminder that I am scoring the entirety of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Grand Prix, and I'm doing them daily at 11 AM Eastern Time, with only a few more remaining. If you're new around here, feel free to click the link in the description for the playlist and binge watch the entire thing. Today, we'll be talking about the Boomerang Cup. I think there could be a creative joke made about how the Boomerang starts off with Tour and then it comes back and ends with Tour again, but I don't know if I'm smart enough to make that joke. But anyway, the first track in this cup is Bangkok Rush from Mario Kart Tour. The second track in this cup is Mario Circuit from the Nintendo DS. The third track in this cup is Waluigi Stadium from the GameCube. And the fourth track in this cup is Singapore Speedway from Mario Kart Tour. I'm not sure if there's a reason why both tracks were based off of Southeast Asian locations, but I know that coming up are Vancouver and Los Angeles, which are both North American cities on the West Coast. I feel like it would have been cooler if instead of putting two tracks in the same region on both of these cups, to mix them up so that each one could have one and one. But that doesn't really matter to me too much as long as the courses remain diverse, because the very last thing I want is for somebody to clip this up and say that I think that Singapore and Bangkok look the same. And with the track record of all the other tour tracks I've gone through, I have very little faith in that not being a thing. Starting off with Bangkok Rush, even the opening cinematic for this track is gorgeous. I think I like when these tour tracks have a night theme to them. They make it more distinguishable and memorable as a result. Something I appreciate about the way that they brought these tour tracks into this game is it seems like they started some of the plainer ones off first and then gave the more exciting ones as you moved along. Obviously I can't confirm this because I'm not going to go dig through when exactly all of these were in tour and then when they got ported over. But to me, it feels like every time I play a tour track, I'm like, whoa, this is way better than the last one. And if you throw this one side by side with some of the earlier ones, this is way better. It almost doesn't even look like a tour track. And I mean that as a compliment. It's such a treat to drive through this track, and no matter which lap you're on, it just feels like the next turn is going to lead to something exciting and new. I mean, even if you look at the map, while all the maps are pretty exotic for the tour tracks, this one's so dynamic it makes the rest of them look pretty tame. I'm definitely giving this one another 3 points, and if this trajectory of tour tracks continues, I can't wait to analyze some of the upcoming ones. The next track is probably going to give you whiplash though. I don't think Mario Circuit is bad, but it's nothing more than a 1-pointer for me. Credit to it, it is a little bit more complicated than most of the circuit courses, and even if the visuals have some of that plasticky feel that many of the tour tracks do, it's still fun to look at. Plus, I'll never get sick of seeing Princess Peach's castle in any of these tracks. A big saving grace of this one is that there are a lot of turns. Actually, I think the track layout is very good, but I feel like if the road was a bit more narrow, maybe some locations where you can fall off, or some sharper turns with enemies and obstacles in the way, then this one could have been a lot more fun and felt more like the SNES or Game Boy Advance retro tracks that come back and are just purely focused on the race. But in its easy state, it just feels like a somewhat more exciting version of the boring circuit tracks. At least the map has the 8 on it. Still, 1 point. Next up is Waluigi Stadium. So I don't remember if I mentioned this when I was covering Waluigi Pinball, but I think if you exclude the Mario Kart arcade title, there are only 2 Waluigi tracks in this entire franchise. Which is bizarre for me to think about because I know there are a lot of Wario ones and we always say, oh, the Wario ones and the Waluigi ones, as if there's almost an equal split between the two of them. But I think Wario has something like 6, whereas Waluigi only has 2. Now granted, Waluigi Pinball is phenomenal, and it might be actually one of my favorite tracks, if not my favorite. I still hate Waluigi's existence though. Weird linky creep. Team Wario for life. Anyway, unlike Waluigi Pinball, Waluigi Stadium just feels like a Wario knockoff stage. If I'm not mistaken, on the Nintendo 64, it started off with Wario Stadium, and then when they got to GameCube, they had Waluigi Stadium, which was a spiritual successor. Wario's Coliseum also made it onto the GameCube, but was so intense and so difficult that it was never actually brought back. I'm pretty sure it's the only 2-lap race in the entire franchise. Actually, fun fact, in Double Dash, a single lap of Wario's Coliseum is actually longer than a single lap of Rainbow Road, which means if it were 3 laps, it would actually be longer than Rainbow Road. But yeah, the Wario Coliseum and the original Wario Stadium are the 2 Wario tracks that have never been remade. Waluigi Stadium grabbed the torch on GameCube and then passed it on to the new Wario Stadium that was made on the DS and brought back into this game in an earlier segment. Which means in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe we have both Waluigi Stadium and Wario Stadium, and they're both excellent. I appreciate the Waluigi Stadium is a bit darker, I appreciate that they added some half pipes to give it a little bit of its own personality. The fake piranha plants are such a fun gimmick, especially because this game has piranha plants, so it's not like it would be absurd to just include real ones in there. I don't know if I necessarily prefer this one over Wario Stadium. I feel like this one might be a little bit simpler, even though it gives up vibes of being a more difficult, if that makes any sense. Like at face value, it seems like this is a more difficult track, but even when you look at the map layout and see the obstacles that are in the way and how wide everything is, I think this one's a little bit easier to run through. But that doesn't make it bad by any means. It's still a 3-pointer, and it's really fun to play in. And wrapping up the Boomerang Cup, we head to Singapore Speedway. So Singapore Speedway actually does a really good job distinguishing itself not only from Bangkok Rush, but from a lot of the other tour tracks. I think the most unique aspect of it is the amount of times you're flying off of a ramp and going somewhere further up into the sky, rather than staying low to the ground throughout the city. I'd actually argue that's the main gimmick of this track. A lot of the locales you drive through are really cool. The skyline with the night backdrop is really fun to look at. And the palm trees all around make me feel all warm and comfortable. I don't know what it is exactly about this one, but I don't feel like it's a 3-pointer. And I think it might be because it's too easy. It feels like there's a lot of just going through the motions. And that actually might be because of the flying sections. Like you blast off, land somewhere, go through a road, maybe do 1 or 2 turns, and then you blast off to the next segment. It's entirely possible that I'm having a difficult time enjoying it because there are 2 tour tracks in this cup, but it does feel like it's the worst one of the 2, and even the easier one of the 2. This one gets 1 point, and it also takes away the difficulty curve point. You could maybe argue that Mario Circuit was already more difficult than Bangkok Rush, but honestly, even Waluigi Stadium might be easier than Mario Circuit. The good thing is, since they didn't even get the tour tracks difficulty curve in order, I don't have to worry about the difficulty curve point being dropped because of the tour track specifically being first. So I can be pretty comfortable in giving it 0 points for the difficulty curve, and 1 point for being a track that I like, but not one that I love. Now, here's a little bit of an issue I have, and it's entirely possible that this is coming up because I am something like 20 cups into this. I think this cup gets 0 points for the diversity. It's bad enough there are 2 tour tracks in a single cup, but neither of them is a daytime theme either to distinguish itself. And I'm sorry to say this, but a lot of the Southeast Asian architecture overlaps. The palm trees overlap. Even the segments of the road with the little dividers in the middle overlap. You can tell which track is which because they're pretty unique from one another, but that's only in the way that they play. Aesthetically, these tracks look way too similar. On the other hand, you have Mario Circuit and Waluigi Stadium. First, when you put the maps side by side, they kind of look similar. Actually, if you rotate this and then mirror it, oh man, they look almost identical. And then when you actually play them, they feel the same. Wario Stadium has a few more jumps in it, some speed bursts and enemy placement to kind of slow you down. But since there are not many moments to fall off and not many underwater sections and nothing really of note to make it stand out so drastically to justify how similar the map layout is, these two mechanically are too similar. The only argument that could be made is that Waluigi Stadium has all of the extra bumps and the flights and whatnot, and if that was the only issue in the entire Grand Prix, then maybe I would say that this is a 2-pointer. But the map layouts being similar, the aesthetics in the tour tracks being similar, it just starts to feel like there's not even remotely enough diversity in this Grand Prix to reward it even the minimal 2 points. Looking back at the Fruit Cup, I'm still pretty comfortable with my decision there, but I felt like it was a little bit more nuanced, so I still stand by giving that one 0 points for the diversity. But this one almost feels like it deserves negative points if that one's a 0, because this is way more on the nose. Lucky for the Boomerang Cup, however, it's not the lowest scoring Grand Prix, and that's because Bangkok Rush gets 3 points, Mario Circuit gets 1 point, Waluigi Stadium gets 3 points, and Singapore Speedway gets 1 point. And the Grand Prix as a whole gets 0 points, both for the difficulty curve and the diversity. If either Bangkok Rush or Waluigi Stadium didn't get that 3 points, this could have been the worst Grand Prix in the entire game. Thankfully, I value courses that I love more than anything else, and when a Grand Prix has 2 courses that I love, it deserves to not be in last place. But 8 points is on the lower end, and with how samey and repetitive everything feels in this Grand Prix, I think it deserves to be there. Let's hope the Feather Cup does better. Super Mario World is probably my favorite game of all time along with Mario 64, and the Feather is my favorite power-up in the entire franchise.